leading off the show, Aaron Quinn, the host of Cover One, Buffalo podcast, to talk about the Bills, who lose a wild one in L.A., 44-42 to the Rams. Aaron, good evening. Thanks for joining us as always. And, well, we got to start with Josh Allen. He takes the quarterback loss, which is the perfect example of why wins and losses should not matter as a quarterback. But the only quarterback in the history of the NFL with 3 rushing and 3 passing TDs in the same game. But, Aaron, it's still not enough. It just shows you how tough it is to win on certain Sundays in this league, isn't it?
Yeah, and I got to say, Raj, I'm the biggest defender of the coaching staff and this organization. We talk about it all the time. And it is tough, though, when you see these historical performances in a losing effort. There really isn't much more a single player can do to drag their team to a victory than we saw Josh Allen do last night. I didn't think the offense looked particularly good in that first half in terms of the offense itself, but Josh just did the miracle, crazy Josh Allen things that only it feels like he can do. You know, Pat Mahomes can make some of the throws, but he can't make the runs in the same way Josh Allen can and manipulate the pocket as good and as strong as Josh can. And I think we've talked about it a couple times as well, that he's made this case over the last few weeks to be the NFL's MVP. And I think even in a loss last night, he probably showcased more the true meaning of most valuable player, of leading his team to a heartbreaking loss, but in a fashion of scoring 42 points. Like, there isn't much more of a case for a most valuable player than the performance Josh Allen put on last night.
Oh, no question. And we've talked that this has not been his statistically best year by far, but that game was as good a game statistically as he's ever had. And again, coming up short. We'll get back to Allen maybe in a minute, Aaron, but let's stay on the coaching staff. And Sean McDermott, and when you and I have visited on our shows, we've talked about this, and the conjecture is out there that the Bills have been a very good team for the last 5 years or so in spite of him. I don't agree with that, but that conjecture is out there. But there are certain elements, certain mistakes, if you want to call them mistakes, that people center on. And the big one, obviously, was the failed quarterback sneak. Now, there's 2 ways to look at it. And during the broadcast, Tom Brady brought it up. And, I was agreed, like, no, don't take the time out. Then you don't have to do the onside kick. I think there's a 6 or 7% chance of covering an onside kick if you have all 3 of your timeouts. However, that quarterback sneak better work, because if it doesn't, then you have to call the timeout. It didn't work. Now, and people are screaming about it. What's your view on that? Was that the right decision? I mean, Allen's going to score a lot of times on that play.
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to preface all my conversation about the end of game stuff with, I think the game was lost well before that, right? If you look at the win probability totals, the period of time we're talking about coaching decisions, they never had a greater than 20-something%, maybe 19% chance of winning that game, statistically speaking. Now, granted, that doesn't account for having Josh Allen as your quarterback, and anything is possible. But the game was really lost in the second and third quarters and how they played and how the defense performed. But back to the conversation of what did happen and giving them a chance of hoping to win late, where you still did technically have some life. It's frustrating to see. What I do appreciate is Sean McDermott was pretty honest in his press conference of saying, they really leaned into what they had for analytics in that moment with the clock running down, and success rate of that particular play of the sneak is one of their most successful plays. And he's not wrong in saying that. And in a vacuum, those analytics are true. I don't know that they're true in the moment that we saw in the game. And I think that's probably where they got a little mixed up in the process of relying on analytics. And he said it then today, that this was the conversation that they had internally today, that, if we are in that situation again, how do we do it? And we probably don't do it the way that we did, right? We saw the lesson there. And I know fans don't want to hear that, but that is part of this. We all make mistakes in the workplace. What I will also say, Raj, is I know Bills fans, I know I'm guilty of this as well. We watch our team with such a scrutiny that we don't judge the rest of the league by, and we demand perfection from these guys. And we get it from Josh quite a bit, so it's also hard. But coaches league-wide make these kinds of mistakes all the time, even the really good ones. Sean McVay, who was on the other side, almost coached away a Super Bowl. When the Rams won that Super Bowl against the Bengals, I would encourage anyone that's mad at Sean McDermott and the decision-making he makes to go watch the final 4 minutes of that Super Bowl. Both coaches were trying to coach that away. Andy Reid, he was known for that for 20 years until he won a Super Bowl. And so I don't think it's uncommon. I think these guys are way more imperfect in these moments than they are getting it correct. But none of that excuses the feelings that come up when this happens to the Bills, because this is the optics and the narrative surrounding Sean McDermott is, can he get over that hump? You're going to face some close games in the playoffs. And he hasn't instilled confidence in this fan base that he's going to be able to make the right calls and pull the right levers in those situations.
There's no doubt. That's a great analysis. And a Super Bowl ring brings you a lot of cachet as a coach or a player. And some stuff is kind of forgotten after you have it. So that's bang on. I do agree with that. So, okay. And yes, you're right. Even if he scores, they have to kick off. They need to stop. One first down ends the game. And like you say, the probability of victory isn't. So let's go back then to earlier in the game with stuff like a block punt and just a total inability to stop the run in this game defensively. Did that set off alarm bells? Because, I'm listening to some of the analysis after the game, and people are saying, boy, you can bet the Detroit Lions are going to watch that game film heading into next week, as maybe the Bills are more vulnerable defensively than people thought. I just thought the Rams had kicked it up. I thought that's the most dangerous 7-6 team I think I've ever seen when you really look at it into the playoffs. But what are your thoughts on the questions now about the Bills' defense?
Yeah, I think there's multiple things to that. To your point, they were a dangerous 500 team coming into this game. They had a month of football where they didn't have two all-pro wide receivers, some injuries along the offensive line. And so I think a lot of people go into a game and you see the record and you see the box scores and you might catch some highlights of them getting beat over the last month. They went 1-4 during a stretch where they didn't have a lot of their players. They've gotten those guys back, and it really was the perfect storm of getting back totally healthy. And also, we've talked about this before, Raj, desperate teams. This was a team that needed a victory to keep their season alive. That division out in the NFC West is still wide open of 6-7 win teams. And that's the only way they're probably going to make the playoffs is to win your division. And so this is a team that's good. They only lost by 1 to the Lions last year in the wild card round. So when healthy, this is a team that was competing in the NFC. I think people maybe forgot that going into this matchup. The closer we got to this one, I didn't love that matchup of their offense versus the Bills defense with some of the flaws that we've seen from the Bills defense. And nothing against Matt Milano. He's coming back from an injury, but he hasn't looked great either. The interior defensive line hasn't looked great. And it really was showcased in this game. What I will say is I watched back every single defensive snap today, really mostly on the third downs to see what happened. They went 11 for 15, the Rams did, on third down. I think the game was lost there and in the blocked punt. And so looking back at what happened, a lot of it, Raj, was actually Bills kind of playing some good defense, getting pressure, had good coverage, and Stafford made perfect throws, and Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua were making outstanding catches, and they were winning against good reps by the Bills. Now, not every rep on defense was good for the Bills, but this team just won a lot of reps, and sometimes you just got to tip your cap to a team that is able to outperform you even when you're in a good spot, and that they did. And every time the Bills made adjustments, Sean McVay had the right answers in his pocket, and it was just that kind of night. Now, to your other point about the Lions, I have huge concerns, but this is also the best football team in the NFL, both offensively, defensively, and in special teams. I hope the Bills can correct the ship a little bit on defense, but I don't feel great after this performance going up against an even better offense in Detroit.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Aaron Quinn is with us from Cover One, the Buffalo Bills podcast. I'm Roger Lajoie. Bills lose 44-42 in a wildly entertaining game against the Rams, where Josh Allen has 6 touchdowns, 3 passing and 3 rushing. Other quarterbacks have had more than 6 touchdowns in a game, 7 to be exact, but Allen gets 3 of each. His athleticism, we already talked about how this solidifies him as a candidate for the MVP. But now the question is, the challenge is going to be maybe psychologically, Aaron, because, and we talked about this last week on the eve of the Bills clinching the division. Well, the division has been clinched. However, now with Kansas City doing a Kansas City thing, i.e. winning 19-17, it seems they do that every week, and it's either a last whatever, but they're 12-1. 2 back with 4 weeks to go is going to be a challenge, even with the tiebreaker. So let's say this week, I believe the Chiefs have the Browns, and if the Bills lose to the Lions, it's going to be, well, what's left to play for? Well, you want to finish ahead of Pittsburgh, I guess, in the round. But now you really start to go, okay, there really isn't anything to play for until the playoffs come up. Talk about that challenge just for Allen and for the organization if that carrot of trying to get to the number one spot isn't in play, let's say, in the last 3 weeks.
Yeah, I think you still want to keep Pittsburgh or whoever is going to make a run there at that second seed at bay. I think you still want to get a home playoff game and host if you can. So there is some incentive to keep going. Also, these guys are all professionals, and there's a lot on the line for some of these guys outside of winning. And I know fans don't always love to hear that, but there's incentives involved for touchdowns and sacks and things like that. So there's some natural incentive anyway to continue to play and perform at a high level. And you have a leader like Josh Allen who says and does all the right things. I think he will never walk onto a football field and not try to win a football game. He's got that Kobe Bryant type DNA where he's going to, as long as the whistle's going, he's going to try to play and win at all costs. The one thing I will say, the one seed would have been cool, but this was a conversation 5 weeks ago nobody was even talking about really in Buffalo. When the Kansas City Chiefs were undefeated, it only became a conversation once you beat them. And it would have been fun if they chased them down all the way to the end of the season. And maybe the Chiefs could still slip up. Anything's possible. The Bills could win out. Chiefs could slip up. That's all still on the table and possible. Probably not likely. You still do have an opportunity here to get at least the bye. You might not get all the home playoff games, but if the Bills solidify that 2 seed, they're going to be able to go into the last week of the season against the Patriots and rest a lot. You're not going to be able to rest all your starters, but you're going to be able to rest a lot of the important players. So as long as you can stay healthy here through these next 3 games or so, you might be able to get some rest built into the end of the schedule here for those guys and have a sort of pseudo bye before you head to the playoffs.
Oh, yeah. Positioning is always important, and the Bills certainly have been a great regular season team for several years, and I'm sure they'll handle it fine. So now the Lions being the challenge for the Bills, and then 3 division games, which are, well, air quotes, easier. However, you never do know. But I think the team is still well positioned, Josh. But is there how do you feel about the injured players? You already talked a bit about Milano, but other players coming back into the lineup. Do you feel good that this team by playoff time is going to be in a degree of health, barring any injuries in the last 4 games, of course, that they can still compete with the best teams in the AFC?
Yeah, I think you are starting to get some guys back. And if I had to guess without any insider information on the injuries, they are kind of using the house money that they have in terms of the record and already clinching the division and being a little bit more conservative with guys like Keon Coleman and Dalton Kincaid. And I know fans want to see them come back and play in these games. But I do agree with a more conservative approach for some of those guys and taking the time. You still have a month of football left to get them back up into play shape for the playoffs. So that's plenty of time, in my opinion, for these guys who they were playing not that long ago. It's not like a Matt Milano who hadn't played in 400 days, right? Milano's still taking a little bit of time. He's not, you can see it in the film that he's just not the guy that he was. The processing's not quite there yet. He's getting his game legs underneath him. But he's got some time here to get ready as well. So assuming you get no new injuries, we did get a couple guys banged up in the last game, but Sean McDermott didn't give any real information on that today. So I'll be looking to see how Rasul Douglas is looking specifically there. As long as you don't get any new ones to any major players, I think the Bills are really positioned well heading into the playoffs. No major injuries currently to any of the top end significant players. So as long as it stays that way, that would be a huge benefit to the Bills, because that's been one of the things, outside of the coaching mistakes that we've seen in the playoffs, is heading into the playoffs without anybody at linebacker, or really depleted in your secondary and stuff like that over the past few years. Going into the playoffs as a healthy team is kind of a sneaky thing that we don't always think about this time of year.
No, and though you think about it when the playoff game comes up and you realize some key guys are out, here's hoping the Bills do stay healthy. A classic game coming up Sunday against Detroit, the 4:25 game on CBS should be a dandy. Then the Bills finish up with New England twice and the Jets. So a 13-win season, very much in the cards still for the Bills. And if they can upset the Lions, 14 wins, another great regular season, and we'll see if they follow it up in the playoffs. Interesting team this year for sure. Aaron Quinn is the co-host of Cover One, the Buffalo podcast, joining us here on SportsNet Tonight. Always enjoy visiting with you, Aaron. Thanks so much.
Hey, thanks for having me on, Raj. We'll talk soon.
Yes, sir. Aaron Quinn from the Cover One Buffalo podcast. Always enjoy his perspective.